Hey everyone, in this video I'm going to be breaking down the comic Junkyard Joe by Geoff Johns and art by Gary Frank. Now, this is the second book in Geoff Johns' Geiger connected universe of books. I covered his first book, Geiger, here on my channel. Check that out, it was fantastic. Junkyard Joe did make an appearance in that book. Although chronologically this book is set before that book, so you could start here, although I do recommend going through Geiger first. So I'm a big fan of Geoff Johns, and I really liked Geiger, and I was really excited for more books in this universe, and I think Junkyard Joe really delivers. The artwork is amazing, the story is very compelling and interesting, and this one is a good ride. It's about a robot named Junkyard Joe who was sent to the war in Vietnam, and then our story kind of kicks off from there. So let's dive into it now. Junkyard Joe. Junkyard Joe, written by Geoff Johns, art by Gary Frank, and colors by Brad Anderson. Junkyard Joe, Chapter 1. In 1972, during the Vietnam War in Vietnam, some U.S. troops are on a military base. It is hot. They want to go home. A new soldier arrives on base. His name is Joe. He does not talk. Joe is to join a group called the Junkyard Dogs. The Junkyard Dogs are composed of a few men. The men are Big Jack, Band-Aid, Matches, Sarge, Green, Bumbles, Whitefield. But the most important man here to our story is a man named Muddy Davis. Muddy has a girlfriend back home in the States that he loves called Rita Evans, and he plans on marrying her when he gets home. Their sergeant calls all the soldiers in. They have some orders. They are about to head out soon. After the Sarge tells them their orders, Muddy Davis talks to Joe. He tells Joe, "Hey, don't pay no attention to Sarge. He cares too much, so he pretends he don't care at all, if you get what I'm saying. I'm Muddy Davis. I was born in Melody Hills, Indiana. Lived there all my life. Met my girl there. Gonna have kids there, and with any luck, I'll die there. It's a nice, quiet place. Where are you from?" Joe just gives a blank expression back to Muddy. Muddy, he just thinks that Joe is scared about fighting. That night, all of the Junkyard Dog soldiers head out. They walk in the jungles for hours. At some point in the jungle, they stop, and they take a look at a map to figure out where they are. Their medman, named Band-Aid, all of a sudden gets shot in the face. You see his mouth just exploding off of his face. Their sergeant yells, "Take cover! I said get down, goddammit!" All of the US soldiers there duck. Not Joe, though. Joe, he just walks further into the jungle, and he expertly aims and snipes the enemy. Blam, 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 blam. 4 shots, all headshots. The other soldiers are impressed. Muddy Davis asks, "You all see that?" A Vietnamese soldier starts running at them. He's got a grenade in his hand. He's planning to blow himself up, but take as many of the Junkyard Dogs down with him. Joe, though, heroically just rushes at the man and tackles him. The grenade goes off. The Vietnamese soldier dies in the blast. Not Joe, though. Joe is just standing there, still alive. Joe collects some weapons on the ground and returns to his fellow soldiers. The grenade blast blew off Joe's skin from his body, revealing he is actually a robot beneath. The Junkyard Dog soldiers are scared and confused, but damn, Joe just saved their lives. The Sarge says that they go on with Joe. Some are worried that, what if Joe shoots them? Their sergeant says, "Any of you don't want that thing on our side after seeing it shoot like that?" Joe, clearly a robot now, goes along with them. The next day, under daylight, they all stop to rest. Joe is standing about 10 meters or so away from everyone, just standing there on guard, looking out into the jungles, while The junkyard dogs, they are just relaxing, playing some poker, betting with cigarettes and chocolate bars, still unsure of what to make of this robot in their group. Muddy, he eventually leaves the poker game and walks over to Joe and tries to be nice with him and make polite conversation. He says to Joe that Joe should take a break with them. He must be getting tired, even if his knees are made of metal. He invites Joe to play cards with the rest of them. Eventually, Joe does decide to join them for cards. While apprehensive at first, the rest of the soldiers, they deal Joe in. And Joe won the poker game, winning all of this cigarettes and chocolate. Afterwards, when they're walking in the jungles, someone commented, "What the hell is a robot gonna do with chocolate bars and cigarettes? Especially the cigarettes." They march on, and Joe is entrenched with them now. He's listening to their problems and stories as they talk with them. He helps them up a steep hill. Eventually, as they are traversing the jungle, a wild cow appears before them. It has a detonation device strapped to it. That surprised them. When the cow was close to them, it blew up. Matches and Big Jack died in the blast. Monty Davis and Joe got trapped under a falling tree. And then some Vietnamese soldiers popped out into the open in the jungle there and started shooting and mowing them down. Sarge and Green got a flurry of bullets pumped into them. They're gone. Bumble saw Muddy and said, "I want to go home." He then gets stabbed with a bayonet. The Vietnamese soldiers make their way over to Muddy, who is trapped under this fallen tree. They're gonna stab him too, but then Joe frees himself from the tree and punches the soldier in the face that was gonna hit Muddy. He punches the soldier with his metal fist. The other Vietnamese soldiers, seeing Joe, get scared, and they run and retreat. And Joe, he picked Muddy up and carried him. Muddy said to Joe, "They killed our friends." Later on, as Joe is walking in the jungle with Muddy, Joe gets a call from High Command through a radio device that is built inside of him. Command says to Joe, "Unit Beta?" That is apparently the code name for Joe. That is what the military refers to him as, Unit Beta. They tell Joe that the mission is over and that he should head south to base. Joe, though, is debating what to do. He remembers Muddy telling him, "They killed our friends." And to Joe, he seems to kind of want revenge. He looks in the tree line and senses that there are some Vietnamese soldiers north of their position. So instead of going south back to base, Joe decides to head north. Joe, he arrives at a small village of Vietnamese. And in that village, Joe is a robot-killing machine. The Vietnamese soldiers are shooting at him, but the bullets are just bouncing off of Joe's metal body. Joe fires back at them. He throws some grenades at them. He kills many in the area. Joe, he keeps firing. He tries to kill anything that moves, anyone and everything in this village. That is when Joe sees a little Vietnamese boy. Joe freezes when he sees the child. He stops firing, but it is too late. Joe already sprayed the boy with bullets. The boy falls down to his knees and then dies. The boy's mother runs over to him and holds her little boy in her arms. This affects Joe. He looks at the woman holding her dead son. He then looks at his own gun, and he decides that this was wrong. No more killing. He's done. Joe breaks his gun in half. He falls to his knees, and he powers down, and he stops visually transmitting what he was seeing back to High Command. In the United States, at a military base, various generals and President Richard Nixon himself see Joe, or Unit Beta to them, and they see his feed go down. One of the Army scientists says to the room, "Unit Beta finished its analysis of the war, Mr. President, and it shut down." Some in the room ask, "What does that mean, shutting down?" Henry Kissinger tells Nixon, "It means this war is unwinnable. We need to end it, Mr. President." Nixon replies, "Prepare the 8-point peace plan, Henry. Notify the Vietnamese. America is leaving Vietnam. Back in Vietnam, Muddy Davis made it back to the military base. There he was resting and getting medical attention. Muddy is going to get to go home. Muddy, he keeps telling everyone, though, about the robot that saved his life out there in the jungles. A doctor there tells him, "Okay, listen, if you keep telling everyone in here about a robot soldier, you're not going home the way you think you are. Soldiers see a lot of things in those jungles, best left behind. I know you think you saw something, you believe it, but it's your mind playing tricks. Because what you really saw, you don't want to ever think about again. You keep talking like this, and I'm going to have to put a blue wristband on you. And you don't want a blue wristband." Muddy Davis, he shuts up about seeing the robot. Was the doctor just telling him that out of concern, or perhaps the doctor was in on whatever Unit Beta was and was trying to tell Muddy Davis to keep quiet about things? As Muddy Davis recovered in that base, he began sketching some drawings of a character based on the robot soldier Joe that he met there in the jungle, the robot that saved his life. He called the character Junkyard Joe. Junkyard Joe Issue 2, Chapter 2. What happened to Junkyard Joe? In the current day now, 2022, in the small town of Melody Hills, Indiana, Muddy Davis is now an old man living alone. What did he end up doing with his life? Well, after the Vietnam War, he married his girlfriend, Rita, and he started a comic strip called Junkyard Joe, which was published in newspapers every day since 1973. The comic strip was about a robot inspired by his interactions with Unit Beta in Vietnam. The robot in this comic strip was called Junkyard Joe, and the comic is about Junkyard Joe and his fellow military recruits eternally stuck in basic training. The comic strip was praised for its humor and subtle commentary on the expectations put upon soldiers and the treatment of veterans. It also spawned cartoon specials, endless merchandise, a popular 1980s video game, so it really had some cultural impact. Recently, though, Muddy's longtime wife, Rita, passed away a few months ago in the summer, and since then, Muddy felt like he could no longer continue his Junkyard Joe comic strip. He always liked to bounce ideas off of his wife, and with her no longer here, he didn't want to keep the strip going. So Muddy announced his retirement and that the comic strip would be ending. This is a big enough story that it even makes the local news in town. So in the current day now, Muddy Davis walks down his snowy driveway to pick up the newspaper to read his final Junkyard Joe strip. As he is picking up his newspaper, that is when his new neighbors, the Munns, introduce themselves. They just moved in across the street. The father is named Sam Munn. His wife, Miss Munn, was Korean American, and she passed away recently. Sam's eldest daughter is Grace, his younger daughter is Emily, and the youngest child is Will. They all say hello to Muddy. Muddy, he just says a quick "mornin'," and then he leaves and heads back inside his home. Sam tells his children, "Do you know who that was? That was Muddy Davis. He's a famous cartoonist. When I was a kid, I read Junkyard Joe in the Sunday Funnies." Muddy Davis, in his home, reads the newspaper with his coffee in a mug that says, "World's Greatest Husband." In the newspaper, Muddy checks out the final page of his comic strip, Junkyard Joe. That night, when Muddy Davis goes to sleep, he has some PTSD and bad dreams of his time in the war. He dreams of the war, and he also sees images of his dead wife, Rita. Muddy, he wakes up from that bad dream in the middle of the night, sweating and his eyes watering. Muddy heads downstairs to his kitchen to make himself a drink. We see in his kitchen, he has a mug that says, "World's Greatest Wife." It's hanging on the wall. We can assume that Muddy's wife used to drink from this mug, and Muddy has a matching one that says "World's Greatest Husband." Muddy leaves his wife's mug there up on the wall out of respect. All of a sudden, there is a knock on Muddy's front door. It's the middle of the night. Who could it be? Muddy goes to check on the door and see who it is. When he opens the door, it is Junkyard Joe, there, in person, on Muddy's doorstep. Muddy gets scared. He screams. He starts backing away. He says, "Stay away, stay away." He tries to run away. He trips. He's then cowering on the floor. Joe, though, does not mean Muddy harm. Why is Joe here, though? Joe cannot talk. Joe just walks in and looks at an old army photo Muddy has on his wall. In the photo are all of the friends they had when they were back in Vietnam that died in the war. Muddy eventually stands up. Muddy, he comments, "Joe, you're not real." Joe looks at a photo closer, specifically looking at Muddy in the photo. Joe then looks at Muddy in his eyes, and Muddy looks at Joe in his robotic eyes. Muddy, he then smiles and says, "It's really you, isn't it? They said you were in my head, but you're here. I knew it. Where have you been? Where have you come from?" Joe just continues looking around the house. He sees a photo of Muddy with his wife, Rita. Muddy, he says, "That was my wife, Rita. She died this summer. She was everything to me." Joe takes off his helmet, almost like he is paying respects. Across the street in the Munn's home, the middle child, Emily, is looking at a sketchbook of hers. In the sketchbook, she looks at a picture of her dead mom that she drew. She tells her mom that her mom would hate it here. Emily is not happy to have been moved across the country to small-town Indiana. Elsewhere in town, at a gas station, some cops are questioning a man named Johnny. Johnny tells the cops that he saw a robot in a soldier's uniform. The robot was reading his paper. Johnny explains that the robot then looked up and saw him staring at him, so Johnny went to go grab his gun. And then when he came back with the gun, the robot came at him, so he fired. The robot then grabbed the gun and broke it in half. And then the robot took his newspaper, the funny section specifically, and then head off. The cops are confused. They don't believe Johnny's story. They tell Johnny, "Look, whatever happened last night, you were probably just drunk or high." As they are talking, though, the two cops then get shot in the head. And an intimidating man named the custodian is the one that shot and killed them. The custodian has a mask, and he is with two intimidating armed military men, also wearing masks. The custodian is apparently actually the man that built and created Junkyard Joe, or how he knows him as Unit Beta. The custodian asks Johnny, "Which way did the robot go?" Junkyard Joe, Issue 3, Chapter 3. Welcome to Melody Hills, Indiana. In the morning, Muddy Davis is awoken by his neighbor, Sam, knocking on his door. Muddy opens the door. Sam is being really nice, saying, "I just wanted to properly introduce myself. I know who you are, and Mr. Davis, is everything okay?" Muddy is preoccupied. His mind is elsewhere. He fell asleep, and now that he's awake, he's wondering where Junkyard Joe is. Sam, he continues talking and tells Muddy, "Look, my daughter Emily, she's an artist too, and I thought..." Muddy, he tells Sam to have a good day. He pushes Sam out of his home, and he shuts the door and slams it in Sam's face. Muddy, he was just concerned about Junkyard Joe and didn't want to get into a whole friendly neighborhood conversation right now. Sam, though, is annoyed with himself. He says, "Great job, Sam. The famous Muddy Davis hates you." Muddy, he's looking around his house for Joe. Eventually, he finds Joe in the basement, doing chores, laundry, cleaning, etc. Muddy asks him, "Joe, why did you come here?" Over at the Munn house, they are all getting ready for school. Grace, who is kind of the pretty popular girl type, is looking for her curling iron and her hair straightener, and she is asking her other siblings if they've seen them. They have not. Emily, who is more the nerdy introvert type, is ignoring her sister. She's reading the entry of Muddy Davis on Wikipedia on her phone. She finds herself intrigued by their new neighbor. As the father, Sam, returns home, Grace and Will leave the kitchen to get ready for school. Emily is already ready for school, though, so her and her father talk. We learn that Emily's mother died in the summer, similar to when Muddy Davis's wife died. And they moved here from San Francisco, as Sam took a new job on. Emily, she doesn't love leaving San Fran to come here. She likes art, and the art program at her school here in Indiana does not really measure up with the one she was in San Francisco. Later on, Sam finally gets all of his kids in the car and drives them off to school. Grace is checking her makeup and refusing to wear her puffy coat. Meanwhile, at the Muddy residence, Joe is doing all sorts of chores. He does the dishes, polished Muddy's shoes, and is sweeping up. Muddy asks Joe, "Joe, how did you find me?" Joe, he pulls a piece of paper from his pocket. It's a newspaper article that reads, "Junkyard Joe strip to end after 47 years. Junkyard Joe creator, Maury Muddy Davis." So when Joe read that, he assumed that Muddy was his creator, so he went to look for him. Muddy tells Joe, "I didn't create you, Joe. I met you back in 1972. Do you remember that? You saved my life." Joe looks puzzled. Muddy wonders what they should do. He says, "Okay, I get you want to help me doing things around the house, but you came from somewhere, and there's gotta be people looking for you, right? Should I call the army or wait, I have an idea." Muddy, he pulls out a map. He shows it to Joe. He says, "Maybe you can point to where you came from on the map." Joe looks at the map, but he has no idea. Muddy then gets another idea. Dog tags. Maybe Joe has a military dog tag. Muddy looks at Joe and finds his dog tag and sees it has no name, but it does have a weird-looking symbol. Muddy's not sure what to make of it. While Muddy is thinking on it, his phone rings. He picks it up. On the line is a man named Dick Eder. Dick works at Veteran Services in town. He cares for Muddy and wants to make sure that he's doing okay. Dick tells him, "I just wanted to see how you're doing. With your wife passing, and I heard you retired from your cartoon strip. I saw it on the TV. A lot of us down here, we really love Junkyard Joe. Well, just wanted to say, if you need your driveway shoveled, I've got my plow. I'll be around your neighborhood later this afternoon. We could talk afterwards." Muddy tells Dick, "I'll shovel it myself." Dick tells him, "Mr. Davis, we got 6 inches last night. You could hurt yourself trying to do that." Muddy tells him, "I think I can handle it today." He's gonna get Joe to shovel his driveway. Over at the school in town later that day, Emily, who is new to school, is introduced to her class. The teacher tells her to tell the class a little bit about herself, like where she's from. Emily says that her and her family moved here from San Francisco. While she is explaining, a bitchy mean girl in class named Heidi replies, "Ooh, fancy, San Francisco. So why'd you move all the way out here? Are you on the run?" Emily answers, "No, my dad got a new job. He's an automation engineer." The teacher knows that Emily is into art, and this is an art class, and she asks her, "Emily, why don't you tell us who your favorite artist is?" Emily, she eventually says, My mom is my favorite artist." Heidi jumps in again. "Your mom is an artist? Pfft, is she famous?" Emily says, "Well, no." Heidi continues, "Well then, who cares about your mom?" The teacher scolds Heidi. "That's enough. Emily then goes to sit at the back of the class. As Emily is walking back to her seat, Heidi grabs onto Emily's books and says, "Wait, I want to see your work, San Fran." Emily then trips and falls into some paints, knocking tons of things over and getting paint on herself. Heidi to this says, "Whoops." So Emily is having a very shitty start at her new school and town. Dick Eder, the veteran services guy, drives by Muddy Davis's home and sees that somehow Muddy did end up shoveling his driveway. Inside Muddy's home, we see that Junkyard Joe is in a big winter coat, and he was the one that shoveled the driveway. Muddy asks if Joe wants to take a coffee break and play some cards. As Joe grabs his world's greatest husband mug, he accidentally knocks the world's greatest wife mug that belonged to his wife from the wall, and the mug falls to the ground and shatters. Joe, he kind of freaks out when this happens. The loud noise startles him. He punches the wall. Joe, he then walks into the other room and he grabs the TV. It seems like he's going to smash it. We can sense that Junkyard Joe seems to be suffering from some sort of PTSD himself. Muddy tells Joe, Joe, it's okay. You're safe. There's no one to fight here." Joe calms down. Over in the Munn home, not only did Emily have a hard first day in school, they all did. Little Will has a black eye. He apparently got suspended from school for fighting. He says the other kids were being racist to him because he's Asian. He says that those hicks told me to take my virus ass back to Wuhan. Grace, she had a bad time at school as well, she says. "The girls I met said things to me today too. They called me a rich bitch just because I have a Gucci bag. It's not like I have a closet full of them. Mom gave it to me on my 16th birthday." As they were all complaining about their day and saying how much Indiana sucks, Sam, the father, starts losing it a bit. He says, "You think you're the only ones that had a bad day? I got chewed out by my new boss because the company's system is so outdated that the updates I installed froze their servers. Their email got wiped out. The entire office blamed me. I look like an idiot. So I don't want to hear any more, alright? Whining about something isn't going to fix it." Emily, she then explodes and yells, "Neither is moving us halfway across the country to some farm town because you can't stand to be reminded of Mom." Sam calms down and says that that's not why he moved them out here. Emily continues, "Yes, it is. You never talk about Mom. You change the subject every time we mention her. You dragged us here because you can't even think about her, not because of some super lame IT job. That's the truth. You can keep lying to us, but you can't lie to yourself." It was pretty harsh what Emily was saying to her father. Sam, he says he's not hungry, and he leaves the room, kind of hurt by her words. Grace and Will tell Emily that she was indeed being a little bit too harsh. Emily says she hates it here, and she heads outside. Outside, it is very cold, and Emily is not sure where to go. Not many options, not many places around. So she walks across the street to Muddy's house, and as she approaches the house, she notices something odd in the window, and she inspects closer. And inside the house, she sees Muddy and the robot, Junkyard Joe, hugging, embracing on the floor. Muddy, he tells Joe, "It's gonna be alright. It was just a mug, Joe. It was only an old mug." Junkyard Joe, Issue 4, Chapter 4, The Bad Men Get to Town. The custodian on the trail of Junkyard Joe finds a newspaper in a field, and he finds the funnies section of that newspaper that Joe stole. And in that funnies section, he sees the Junkyard Joe comic strip, and in it, it says, "By Maury Muddy Davis." The custodian is then confident that Joe probably went to see this Muddy Davis. Over at Muddy Davis's house, Muddy and Joe see that Emily was spying on them. After some initial surprise, Muddy eventually lets Emily into his house. Emily, seeing the robot, asks, "Is that Junkyard Joe?" Muddy replies, "Seems to be." Inside the house, Emily looks around. She sees some of the Junkyard Joe merchandise and art around. Muddy comes back with some tea for both of them. She tells Muddy, "If you're worried about me telling anyone about your robot, I won't. Did you make him?" Muddy answers, "No." Emily asks, "Well then who did?" Muddy answers, "I'm not sure exactly. He just showed up on my porch last night. I met Joe back in Vietnam. He saved my life. I thought he was a dream, really, that I imagined him up. I came home and then," Emily finishes the sentence and says, "and then you created the comic strip." Muddy tells Joe that Emily won't hurt him. Emily is surprised. She says that Joe seems more afraid of her than she is of him, and she's afraid of a lot of things. Over at the Munn home, Grace and Will become concerned that Emily has been outside for a long time. She might freeze out there, it's cold. Back in Muddy's home, him and Emily talk a bit more about Joe. They try to think of who can figure out what the deal with Joe is and help him. At that moment, Will and Grace, looking through Muddy's window, see them all inside. Will exclaims, "A robot!" Grace says, "Oh my god." Eventually, they too are invited inside of Muddy's home. Will thinks that Junkyard Joe is pretty cool. He states, "Man, we gotta tell Dad. He's gonna freak Emily. He loves robots, especially that one from Futurama." Emily says that they will not show their father, Joe. Muddy asks who these two are. Emily explains they are her brother and sister, Will and Grace. Muddy, when hearing their names, says, "Will and Grace, like the TV show?" Will and Grace here have no idea what TV show Muddy is referring to. After they all talk a little bit more into the night, and eventually the Munn children all go home, and they promise to keep Joe a secret. At the Munn home the next morning, all the children are quiet. They want to keep Junkyard Joe a secret from their dad, so they are just trying not to say anything. The dad, Sam, apologizes for their argument the night before. He says he's sorry. The stress of moving and work. He's sorry that he didn't handle everything better. The children, acting weird and trying to keep quiet, quickly accept their dad's apology, and then they are overly eager to get going to school. In town, Muddy Davis is walking with Junkyard Joe. Joe is hidden under a thick jacket and ski mask to hide his robotic appearance. In town, everyone is saying hi to Muddy. Muddy is a local celebrity for his cartoons, and he is often pretty reclusive, so people are genuinely a little excited when they see him. On the town main street there in Melody Hills, Indiana, they have a big banner that says, "Melody Hills, home of Junkyard Joe." Muddy, he takes Joe to the veterans office. There, Muddy meets Dick Eder, who heads up veterans services in town. Muddy seems to be on very friendly terms with Dick. Muddy has Joe reveal himself to Dick Eder. Muddy tells Dick, "Mr. Eder, meet Joe." Dick Eder responds with surprised adulation. When the Munn children return from school that day, they decide to check in on Muddy Davis and Joe. However, when they get to Muddy's house, they sense that something is not right. Inside Muddy's home, they find the custodian there, along with his henchmen. The custodian asks the kids, "Where's Junkyard Joe?" Junkyard Joe, Issue 5, Chapter 5, Junkyard Joe versus the World. In Muddy's house, Emily asks, "Are you robots too?" The custodian answers, "No, I'm the rightful owner, but clearly you've seen it. So I'll ask you kids one last time. Where is Junkyard Joe?" At the veterans office, Dick Eder inspects the symbol on Joe's dog tag. He does not recognize it, but he tells Muddy that he has a buddy in Washington that might be able to help. Joe, meanwhile, in the office is tidying up, sweeping. Dick Eder comments to Muddy how this is like the comic come to life. Dick then tells Muddy how much impact his work has had over the years. He says, "Mr. Davis, what you created over the decades has given joy to the world. You never come into town, but your wife did. Mrs. Davis knew everyone in Melody Hills, and she knew what Joe meant to us." Muddy replies, "Rita did love this town. Dick to this says, and the town loved her back, and we miss her too." Afterwards, Muddy and Joe are driving back home to Muddy's house. Along the way, Muddy tells Joe a little sadly, "I know I should have gone into town more regularly. There are some awfully good folks here. It's nice to know that they miss Rita too. I'm glad you came to see me, Joe. Thank you." As Muddy and Joe return home, the custodian is there waiting for them, and they have the Munn children at gunpoint. The custodian says, "Hello, Mr. Davis," and "Hello, Joe." Muddy says, "Who are you people? Release those children right now." Joe, he then snaps and immediately goes back to Vietnam kill mode. Joe runs at the custodian, punches him with his metal fist right in his face. Joe then punches the other henchman, and he grabs their guns and breaks them in his hands. Muddy tells Joe to go with the kids and get out of here. He's gonna phone the police. As Joe and the kids leave, and Muddy gets on the phone with 911, the operator picks up. Muddy tells them there's 3 men in his house, but then the custodian, who has now gotten up, smacks Muddy in the back of his head with his gun, and Muddy falls to the floor, knocked out. Later that day, Sam Munn returns home. He wonders why his kids aren't here, and then he notices that Muddy's front door is open across the street, which is definitely odd in the winter, so he decides to check it out. When he gets over to Muddy's house, he finds Muddy passed out on the floor, bleeding from his knock to the head. In the woods, Junkyard Joe is leading the children, while the custodian and his 2 henchmen are on their trail. Joe and the children come across a freshly killed deer shot by some hunters. Will thinks that maybe the hunters can help them. Emily is concerned though. She knows that Joe does not like guns and might kind of freak out when he sees the hunters. Sure enough, when the hunters come to collect their deer, Joe, seeing their guns, freaks out. He charges at them. He grabs their guns and punches one of the hunters in the face, and Joe then breaks all of their weapons. The hunters run away in terror. Joe, he then stands over the dead deer and bows his head in mourning. In an ambulance, Sam is with Muddy Davis on their way to the hospital. Muddy wakes up from being knocked out though. He sees Sam, and he tells Sam, "Your kids are in danger." Earlier, Dick Eder said that he would phone his friend in Washington and see if he could find out any information on this robot, Junkyard Joe. Well, when Dick phoned Washington, it got some people there talking. At the Pentagon, we see some unseen people reading a Unit Beta top secret file. One man says, "How many people knew about this?" The other man replies, "I don't know if anyone did before they broke in. Thing was mothballed so long ago, I think everyone on the project is long gone. Why was it shut down?" The other man answers, "They shut the robot down because it killed everyone it met." Junkyard Joe, Issue 6, Chapter 6, The Killer. We have a flashback to 1972, when Muddy Davis was recovering at base in Vietnam. The custodian came to visit him. He said hello to Muddy, and then he said, "I'm an engineer. I design weapons for the United States. I came to ask you about what you encountered in the jungles. One of the nurses said that you've been insisting your life was saved by a robot soldier. Can you tell me more about this robot?" Muddy, then being secretive, told the man, "No, I didn't see a robot. I didn't see anything out there, except every one of my friends die." The custodian to this answers, "Oh, I must have been mistaken then. Have a safe trip home." Back to the current day now. The custodian and his men are still searching for Joe. Joe and the kids have made it to town through the forest, and they are approaching Main Street, and they are trying to stay hidden. In the ambulance, Muddy Davis insists that Sam's kids are in danger and that they need to go to the police station right now. The ambulance drivers debate what to do, but since Muddy Davis' wounds aren't life-threatening, the ambulance driver decides to abide by Muddy's wishes and divert the ambulance to the police station. In town, the kids want to get Joe inside the Veterans Services building so they can lie low before the townspeople spot Joe. Will decides to create a distraction for them. Tomorrow is the day when the Christmas tree lighting ceremony is supposed to take place. Well, to cause a distraction, Will decides to light up the tree right now. He flips a switch and the lights go on, and the townspeople all stare at the tree. While they are looking at it, Joe and the kids sneak into the Veterans Services office. Inside the office, Dick Etter is there. The kids explain to Dick that they need help. There are 3 men with guns who came for Joe, and they're after us now too. They were wearing crazy robot masks. Will adds, and they were total dicks. Dick Etter replies, "My God, they must have tracked Joe here. My friend put me in touch with someone at the Pentagon. The men after you are part of a militia who attacked a classified government storage facility in Huntington, West Virginia last week. I'm gonna call the Pentagon back and tell them to hurry. You kids, stay in my office with Joe. It'll be safe." Well, it is not safe. The custodian then arrives and shoots at Dick Etter in his shoulder. The custodian then tells Joe, "If you advance against me or my men again, the next bullets are for the children. That's where our guns are aimed. Do you understand?" Joe seems to understand. Joe tries to help Dick Etter and stop the bleeding from his gunshot wound. The custodian, annoyed, yells, "Unit Beta! I said not to move! Unit Beta!" Emily yells at the custodian, "He's just helping him! That's all Junkyard Joe does is help people!" The custodian, annoyed, says, "That is not his name. He is not Junkyard Joe, and that is not why I built him." Will chimes in, "Let me take a wild guess. You were trying to make a killing machine." Grace adds, "Yeah, well, he didn't want that. Joe doesn't even like guns." The custodian says, "That's because someone set out to deliberately destroy my greatest achievement. Unit Beta was the perfect soldier. Until something changed it out in those jungles, it failed to follow orders, and it shut down. I was certain one of my envious colleagues had sabotaged my work. They had removed me from my own program. But I found my former teammates over the years. I eventually found Unit Beta too, long forgotten like me, but its programming was still damaged. When activated, it turned on us, and then it disappeared. It came to this stupid town, mistakenly identifying its creator as Muddy Davis instead of me. But, like me, my robot was used up and thrown away after its war, as were my friends here after their wars. The same breed of liars who stole my life's work from me are still controlling this country, even now. But they won't be for much longer. Once I fix Unit Beta, it will go to Washington, D.C., and it will be the unstoppable killing machine I designed it to be." Joe, after stopping the bleeding on Dick Etter's arm, charges at the custodian. The custodian and his henchmen fire on Joe. But the bullets do nothing. Joe punches one of the henchmen right into a wall. The other henchman grabs a grenade and is going to blow all of the kids up. Joe tackles that henchman through the door outside. The grenade explodes. A huge blast goes up. Smoke clouds engulf the street. Joe is still fighting. Eventually, the custodian grabs Emily and has a gun to her head. He yells at Joe, "You've caused me so much trouble!" Muddy and Sam arrive in the ambulance on Main Street, just in time to see the custodian with Emily. Will and Grace, seeing their dad, run over to him. Sam yells, "Let my daughter go! Please!" The custodian starts yelling for Joe to come with him. He yells, "I did not come here to hurt you, Unit Beta. I only came here to bring you home. Your place in this world is not with them, it is with me. I am your creator, not that sad old man. I am your custodian. You will obey. You are not Junkyard Joe. Muddy tells Joe, do what you came here to do, Joe. Joe rushes the custodian and forcefully pushes him to the ground. Emily then runs to her dad. The custodian appears knocked out and demasked. The townspeople, seeing Joe, are scared of him. They call him a weapon and say that somebody should shoot at it. Muddy talks to the crowd of townspeople. He tells them, everyone calm down. There's no need to be afraid. Please, you know me. I'm Muddy Davis, and you all know him. This is Junkyard Joe. Most of you grew up with Joe, right here in Melody Hills. This is his home, too, and Joe loves this town, and the people in it as much as I do. I'm asking you to please just love him back. That's all we want when we come home. 3 black cars then pull up. Government men in suits pile out of those cars. A man named Agent Polak tells the crowd to step away from the robot. Emily says, no, he's our friend. Agent Polak tells Emily, that machine is the property of the United States government, young lady, and it's extremely dangerous. Grace replies, no, he's not. Will adds, yeah, Joe took out the real bad guys. Sam says that his kids are right. Agent Polak says that they have orders. Now step aside. The entire town then steps in front of Joe to protect him from the government agents wanting to take him away. The agents there decide to grab the custodian and let Joe stay behind. They're not going to fight on an entire town of people. Once the agents leave, the town cheers. 7 months later, Muddy and Joe, who's wearing a Hawaiian shirt now, are having a barbecue with the Munn family. Muddy has started his Junkyard Joe comic strip up again. He is now inspired by Emily and Joe and all of them to continue on with his work. They all have a great time at the barbecue, and it seems like Muddy Davis, Joe, and the Munn family have themselves a happily ever after kind of ending. But on the last page, just out of view of the barbecue, we see a blue time travel teleportation light open up, and out of the portal comes Geiger, also known as the Glowing Man. Geiger has his 2-headed dog Barney with him. Geiger is a character we've seen before in the Geiger trade paperback, which is another book in this Geiger universe of Geoff Johns. However, beside Geiger and Barney, we see another man with them. We do not know who this man is, but he is most likely another unnamed hero in Geoff Johns' Geiger universe, another of what this series calls the Unnamed. Geiger, he says, there's the robot. It's too soon. The unnamed man replies, oh no, they found us. We have to go back and fight. And then they teleport away. And we assume that this plot point will be picked up again at some point in the future. But with that, we end Volume 1 of Junkyard Joe. As part of the greater Geiger universe, here is the timeline of the various unnamed heroes, which we will be at some point all introduced to. 1776, Redcoat becomes immortal. 1864, the Northerner begins his hunt. 1944, the monster is made. 1972, Junkyard Joe comes online. 1997, American Widow X has her revenge. 2025, the first ghost is captured on film. 2030, the unknown war erupts. 2050, Geiger walks across America. Alright, so that was Junkyard Joe, and I thought this book was really fun. It was really interesting seeing this robot being sent to the Vietnam War, watching him be this killing machine, watching him have this camaraderie with his fellow troops, and then we see the horrors of war, and he kills a kid, and Joe just shuts down. And then when we jump to the future, it was really fun having this Muddy Davis character make this cartoon character of Junkyard Joe, and then Junkyard Joe shows up at his doorstep, and we see Joe has some PTSD. There's lots of mystery. How did Joe get here? Where has he been? Who created Joe? How can Muddy help Joe? How can Joe help Muddy? How can the Munn family, and how do they tie into this? So all that was really great. Loved all the plot threads and how the story unraveled. I think Gary Frank, the artist on this book, did an amazing job. He is really a top level artist. Every page looked great. Now, there's the war pages he's drawn, but beyond that, even the pages where it's just mundane, everyday conversation of a family talking around a dinner table looked amazing because of him, and it really draws you into the story more when what otherwise could be seen as kind of a boring lull in the book. Now, the end of this particular volume, we had Joe confronting this custodian character. They battled, the custodian got knocked out and taken away. The government was also going to haul Joe away, but the townspeople kind of protected Joe, and I did like that. Now, we also had Geiger and Barney and a mysterious unknown figure show up through a teleportation time travel kind of portal, and that leads to some interesting stuff in the future, potentially, to see where all of these books are going to go. So I thought Junkyard Joe was a great continuation of the Geigerverse. I thought this book was really fun, and I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching, and I will be back again in the future.